Well, good morning.
Good morning.
You guys remember Rachel Bass, who's teaching with us this year. And so Rachel has come to be our interview for today. And my hope is that she gets to share some of her parenting wisdom, either from successes or failures or mistakes, or we all have that as moms. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I just hope that you also get a chance to know her a little bit better as part of our Bloom team this year. So Rachel, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I know we've got a couple pictures of your family. I know you've introduced them before, but I'm going to let you do that again so everybody has some context this morning.
So this is our family. Starting from the left, that's Caroline, our oldest. She's a sophomore at the University of Arkansas. And then my husband, Josh, will be married 22 years in January. And we got married at the Old Fellowship in what is now the PA Lower School cafeteria. And my kids think that's so gross that we got married in the cafeteria and have asked me if it smelled back then like it smelled now, and it did not. Next to Josh is Bo. He turned 15 yesterday. True is a senior. Don't tell anyone. I think he's going to Arkansas, but he hadn't put it on social media, so it's not real yet. And then Sasha is 13, and then me. So that's us.
Yeah, so sophomore in college, senior in high school, 15 and 13.
9th and 7th, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us just a little bit about your family and kind of those early years. And I know, well, we'll get into that. But if you could go back to yourself as you were entering kind of those preschool years.
Yes. Okay, well, one of the things, before I had Caroline, our oldest, my mom gave me like a 7-page front and back letter, handwritten, and she gave it to me the night before I went in to be induced, and she said, these are all of the things I just want to share from my heart before, y'all, I cry at everything, don't worry, I cry at commercials too, before you become a mom. And the one that stuck with me the most during toddler and preschool, and really actually teenage years too, is that fallen kids act fallen because they're fallen. Not because they're setting out to embarrass us, not because they want to make us look stupid or bad or whatever, but they're fallen because they're fallen. And so our goal is to guide their hearts and not to be embarrassed and not to make it about us.
Well, yeah, and not because we've screwed them up already.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's easy to be like, oh my gosh, there's 3 and I've already screwed them up for their entire lives.
Which sometimes
is true,
yes.
but no, I'm kidding. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So tell us a little bit about your kids.
Yes.
And what these years looked like for you guys.
So I raised 2 very separate sets of preschoolers. So I sent a couple other pictures. If you could pull up Superman and the ballerina. Yeah, see on the left, those are my oldest 2, Caroline and True. Those are the ones that if I had told them to sit on that step, they would have sat on that step for 3 hours and just sat there, and they would have told each other stories and shared
that
their
sweet
candy.
smile. Look at
yeah,
that cute smile.
That was legit how they were. And then the ones on the right that look like they're about to take off were about to take off. They were very different. Sasha came out strong-willed and determined, and Bo, and I'll get into this a little bit more, had some developmental issues and all of that didn't really appear until preschool years. And so some of his running and lack of listening was not necessarily a fallen situation. It was just the way God created him, and he was locked in his little brain. But it was a very different life. The ones on the right locked me out of our house one time after Easter to eat their Easter candy all at one time.
At what age?
At like 2 and 4. Planned it, executed it. I hit a key after that. It was before those doors that you could put the number in, and took turns coming to the window beside the door to wave at me and let me know they were okay. We called them pterodactyls.
Anybody feel better about your 2 and 4-year-old right now?
We called them pterodactyls because one would distract and the other would attack. And so all the things I thought were so great about my parenting from the first 2, it's just the way God made them. If you get too proud of your parenting skills, God will humble you. So pride goes before a fall.
Yes. So let's talk. I mean, we're kind of trying to cover 4 different areas each week. Just
Yeah.
the spiritual formation of kids, emotional, behavioral, and relational. So let's talk just kind of about some of those things. Maybe things that you feel like were wins that you did well, but maybe things looking back that you wish you had done a better job of.
Yeah, lots. I think spiritually, one thing we really did try to invite God into the areas like naturally and not make it just Sundays or awkward or and we didn't do family devotions because that's just not we weren't good at sitting down at night and doing that. But we did the Hide 'Em in Your Heart CDs. I don't know if y'all have heard of those, but they were in my car, and I'll be honest, they alternated between that and VeggieTales and Dora movies, although we had like the VCRs that you strapped to the seats. It was a very different life. But even now when my kids are fighting, they know that in Target I will, and I'm sorry I'm not on the worship team and you'll know why, will say, quit being mean, okay, encourage one another in the middle of Target while they're 13 and 15, and it devastates them. But they know because we learned those scriptures. We just tried to make it natural, just a part of like their everyday life.
Yeah. So one of the scriptures that you wanted to point out this morning is Deuteronomy 6,
Yes.
4 through 9. And I'm going to read the whole thing. And it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." So tell us about that verse and just kind of what you're talking about as far as just every day, when we lie down, when we rise.
We tried to have scriptures posted on the refrigerator or wherever, just so it was natural. So when something was going on, we could bring God into the situation, because and as they've gotten older too, you can't always just sit down and have like a big, deep theological discussion, especially when they're 3 or when they're 4 and when they're 5. But you can put those droplets of truth and just sprinkle it through every day so that it becomes a part of their character and a part of their normal. And so they're used to hearing that. So then when you do need to sit down and have the big discussions, it's not like you're teaching them algebra and they haven't had addition. It's part of what they know.
Yeah, I love that. And we talked a little bit, we've been talking just about the character of God. And I think that's a great way to just continue to plant those seeds, just talking about who God is and teaching your kids that, because they can begin to wrap their minds around those character qualities, because we're talking to them about being kind and sharing and doing. And so I think to be able to say, we want to be kind because God is kind first. He shows us that about himself, and we just want to reflect that. And so I love that, just planting those seeds when they're little, bringing all of those things in so that it does become the norm for your family, the norm for your kids to talk about that.
They're little, when they would wake up scared in the middle of the night, we would say the first thing you do is you call out the name of Jesus, because even the demons flee when you say his name. So your bad dreams and your scary things, like, they can't handle the name of Jesus. And sometimes I think they would go back to sleep. Sometimes they come in, they'd be like, I yelled Jesus and I'm still scared. Like, okay, that's fine, get in bed. But there's those are things I still do, and those are things my parents taught me, was the name of Jesus, or that Jesus is here with you, and just passing that on so that they do remember.
Yeah, and I think, again, even that step of, we know from our own faith that just because we walk into a situation and say, Lord, I need courage, like, take away my fear.
Right.
It's not like a magic trick or a vending machine. And so I think even in those times, we can teach our kids, this is what faith looks like. Like, faith looks like knowing who God is even when we don't feel what we're asking for, pressing in and continuing to trust Him and trust Him for protection. And I mean, there's so much that you can begin to teach them at just.
And they're soaking it up because they believe that as much as they believe that bubble guppies can swim and talk underwater. So
Yeah.
they really believe everything you tell them right now.
Yes. Yes.
That doesn't last long.
Yeah. Okay. What about relationally in this stage? Like, how did you invest relationally? Even because now in this stage, you're really beginning to get a lot of sibling relationships too.
Yeah.
So
This is really the first time too at this age where they get their feelings hurt, or you see them with friends, and sometimes they're at preschool or you've got playgroup or whatever, and you see them get their feelings hurt by someone you did not birth, and you kind of want to punch them. Like, I can remember really one little girl hurt Caroline's feelings and thinking, I probably can't look at her for a couple of weeks because I really want to smack her or trip her or something. But teaching them how to walk through that and how to, you don't badmouth the friend, because then they start badmouthing the friend. You teach them how to love, and it goes back to some of that, like, okay, Jesus is kind and Jesus forgives. We're going to be kind and we're going to forgive. But I think also teaching healthy boundaries. You're not saying you always have to share your toys, but you're saying, all right, why don't y'all figure out how to share the toys? So that means you get it for 10 minutes and you get it for 10 minutes, because you don't want to teach them to be doormats. You don't want to teach them to not stand up for themselves, but you want them to be kind and loving. And this is when it's great to have those friends over, because you see a side of your kid you don't see necessarily with your family. Different sides of them come out. And so I think too, investing in friends that have friends your kids' age, again, to the crying, all the stuff that Bo, our 15-year-old, has struggled with, he's had these little friends who have been his friends from the beginning, and that's all they know is Bo. They don't know they didn't know that wasn't normal at 3 or 5 or 7, and now even at 15, one of the moms told me just Saturday night, our boys love Bo so much. Y'all, he's not a typical 15-year-old boy. He's great. There are a lot of things about him that are typical, but he is not, he's not typical.
yeah.
And so they've invested in him, and they love him for who he is. And the parents knew how to handle if he was triggered by something. They knew how to love him and walk him through that. And investing in him at 3 with some friends that have walked through life with him has made his life so different now.
I think too, this is really an age where we start to, I mean, I call it casting vision for our kids.
Yeah.
And no matter if we realize it or not, we put labels on our kids of who we see them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we kind of can pigeonhole our kids,
Yeah.
right? And we might try to put it in kind words like, he's really busy, or he has a lot of energy, or even the things that they're interested in. I tend to label Annie as my artist and my creative one. Well, my other kids can kind of hear that as she's the creative one, I'm not. Mm-hmm. And I just think there's so much beginning at this age where you can begin to call out things that you even see a glimpse of in your kids. Charlie was a little bit older, so I should probably save this for another time, but I won't think of it when the time comes. So Charlie was always our more emotional kid. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I have 2 girls and he's the boy. This is backwards. But he was the one who would talk more about how he was feeling. Now, when he was in those early, 6 and 7-year-old years, it was a complete disaster. But because he couldn't name all of that, he would just be crying and frustrated and say, it feels like everyone hates me. Well, what I could see in that, though, is that with some maturity, this can be a really good thing. And so even in this preschool stage, you begin to see begin to see kids who have a strong personality. And it is hard at that stage, right? But what you can begin to see in the future is that with some maturity, these kids are going to be good leaders. They're going to be influencers. But it takes some maturity. And so with our mom lens, we have to be able to kind of see the potential for good in those things.
And when I would see my kids in relational situations, I'd kind of try to, especially if there was a kid that was really bothering me the way they were treating my kid, or if I was bothered by my child and the way they were, I would try to think back, okay, who does that remind me of growing up? Oh my gosh, that friend ended up being amazing because their inability to take no for an answer has made them an amazing missionary or an amazing executive.
I love that.
And so trying to remember, who do I know that's like that, that's turned out okay, that's not like, on a list of people no one wants to be friends with.
Yeah, that's so good because there's all these good qualities, but when they're immature, they're ugly.
Yeah, for sure.
And so it takes us a while to mature those things, but I think in these preschool years is when you begin to see those tendencies.
Yes.
And so if you can kind of keep casting some vision, if you have a little baby and you have an older one who's always wanting to help, like to the point that is driving you crazy, instead of getting frustrated, you can affirm that in them and help them mature that to something that is the good version of how God has wired them. So let's read Psalm 139, 13 through 16 is one of the other scriptures that you wanted to use today. It says, For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So talk to me a little bit more about how you talked to your kids, especially Bo and Sasha. Mm-hmm. And I know some of this probably came later, but just about what you were saying about God made them the way they are.
Yeah. So Bo has some processing stuff. There's lots, and as he gets older, I'm less detailed about some of his diagnosis because it's his story, and he's old enough to hear and to get on a podcast or so a lot of it is his story to tell. But back then it was my story to tell too. And so sitting in Pediatrics Plus lobby filling out a form, and I called my husband crying really hard, and he said, "What's happened?" And I said, "I'm so happy." Which, see, again, my tears can be deceptive. I said, there are so many people like Bo. They've made a whole form like him, for him. Like, he's not alone. But he's fearfully and wonderfully made. And so when he is struggling with stuff, and Sasha's, we call her a medical unicorn. Like, if there's some weird, like, one in a gazillion people can have it, she's going to have it. And she's got some learning struggles too. And we'll just say, like, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. God didn't turn his head while you were on the little processing plant and he forgot to stamp you and you just made it off. You're not a defect. You're not wrong. You're exactly who God created you to be. And he's created you for a purpose that right now you're not fitting in a box that's created for a majority of people. Maybe you don't fit that box, but he's got a purpose for you, and you are created by him for a reason. And so we're going to figure out how to get you to that purpose. And until then, it's a great way for you to lean on God, for us to encourage you. Even stuff like, see Caroline back there, Bo's struggles gave her purpose. And she's in school to be an occupational therapist because she saw what those people did for Bo. So it's not just that they're fearfully and wonderfully made for themselves. They're fearfully and wonderfully made, and God uses them. He used a 3-year-old pulling his 7-year-old sister's hair out to give her a passion for kids who struggled like him. And it's okay. It's okay if your kids don't fit in a box, and it's okay if they do.
Yeah. It's so hard because those are the years that you begin to really see the differences in kids, and our world is set up for the kids who fit in the box.
Yeah. I mean, we looked at Caroline and True, and we just like, you get to the next phase, and you're like, check, check, and then we got to Bo, and then we got to Sasha, who we were like, you take her in public, you're like, anything could happen. But she's going to be a great leader. She does not take no for an answer, and that child is going to conquer something. And I believe because she loves God, she's going to conquer something in His name because she's fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah, I love that.
Even when I screamed at her a lot. So she's fearfully and wonderfully made in spite of me.
So let's talk a little bit about how you and Josh parented during this stage. What are some ways that you guys kind of parented from the same team?
Yes.
What are some ways that you brought him in? Because I know, I feel like that infant through preschool stage is kind of when, and maybe this is just me, but it's kind of when you're like, wait a minute, we got our routines and you're kind of messing them up, And it's easy to sort of push our husbands back a little bit because it feels like it sometimes can make things a little bit harder.
Yeah. I'm not really sure how this happened. I would like to say it was incredibly intentional. I think some of it was, I did grow up with a dad who was involved and who did story time, bedtime, bath time, whatever. It wasn't like, he just provided, period. But Josh did bath time, and part of that was because he's way more fun than I am. And so, I don't like a mess in the bathtub, and I'm more like, let's wash your hair and get done. And he's more like grabbing the toys and having an imagination with them. And so he did bath time. And then for our older two, in the morning, he did breakfast with them. And they would sit in his lap on our chair. I should have put a picture of that. One on each knee, and they would share a bowl of cereal between the three of them. And it was so precious. He was just involved. He just, we just didn't really, I don't know. I wish it was intentional. I wish I could say we did that on purpose, because then I would feel really good. But it was just, he's a good dad. He's a really good playing dad. He loved those preschool times. He loved that. And somehow we also, and I know there was intentionality to it, decided about that age we were going to be more about the heart modification and not behavior modification, because you're not like, don't touch the outlet, don't touch the outlet. Now you really are starting to shape hearts and character that is going to last forever. And we presented choices. There were a lot of choices given, which my grandmother, it cracked her up, because Caroline would real sassy be like, it's my choice. Like, this is my choice. And then there were consequences to those choices, good and bad. So
yeah, I think choices are big at this age, because whereas in that toddler phase, it's like you have to be real simple with your language. It is no, and it is yet. I mean, it's, you can't do a lot of explaining. When you start getting into that preschool age, they are understanding more. You can communicate with them more. And so I know one of the things that I think I did, I wish I'd done a little bit differently, is I gave my kids too many choices.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to make the choice, because I just don't like making decisions. It's just kind of how I'm wired. And so, I asked a lot of more open-ended questions, like, well, what do you want to eat for lunch today? What do you want to wear today? And I think you can give too many choices, but I think that those preschool ages are the perfect time to say, especially to a stronger-willed kid, do you want to wear the red shirt today, or do you want to wear the purple shirt today? And so they still feel like they're getting some choice and some control, but then, like you're saying, they're helping them understand, Mom said you need to not touch the outlet. If you do, this happens.
Right.
And they can understand that at a pretty young age.
It takes a lot of the emotion out of the discipline too. If you're like, okay, I told you had the choice to pick up your toys, or I was going to take them away. Well, then it's not that you're the meanest mom in the world. It's you chose for me to pick them up for you, which is why they're on top of the refrigerator for a week or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I want to go back to Josh for a second and just playing with your kids. Because I think at this age, this age and even those early elementary years, you've probably seen the quote floating around on social media, if you follow parenting things, it says something along the lines of, when your kids are young, they don't come to you and say, I'm worried about this. They come to you and say, will you play with me? And I think playing with your kids at that age is such a huge thing, and a lot of dads are really good at that.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at it
I'm
because I
terrible
hate
at
like imagination and pretending kinds of things. And so I got really tired of pretending to play whatever with my kids. And so that's one thing that I wish that I had done more of, is just play with them.
Yes.
But a lot of times dads are really good at that,
And I
even though
remember
they make a mess.
Connie Phillips, when I was in what we called Moms and More back in the day, saying she would lay down on her floor and tell her kids, because she was tired, because she had 4 close together like me, and tell her kids she was like the track. And they could all take their cars and just run them all over her body. And they thought she was playing with them, and she was maybe napping. Who knows?
That is genius.
Yes. So sometimes you're playing like, you want to play mommy with me? Why don't we put the dishes away? I mean, you can get creative with it, but sometimes you just got to sit on the floor and be Barbie. Like it or not.
Yeah. Yes.
Or you say, Daddy will be home in a minute, and he loves being Ken doll.
Oh, I'm sure Josh loved that one. All right. Well, what else would you say to us this morning? Is there anything else that you would say to us just about how God used this preschool stage to really shape you and to refine you as a mom?
At this point, they're kind of emotionally able to verbalize a little bit, and so I think that's one thing. And I come from 2 parents who did a lot of counseling professionally, and so we were good in our family about identifying and naming and working through emotions. And so our kids, the boys, not as much, just because they're not as big of talkers. And I don't know that is a boy thing or if that's just who they are. Bo is better about it now because it's a very factual thing for him. But naming our emotions and being able to say I'm sad or I'm mad or I'm so excited, and I think that's a big thing. For me, this stage was really where I had to start really trusting God. I was scared sometimes when they were babies and toddlers because they couldn't communicate with me, and so I didn't know what they were thinking or feeling, or if they were hurt, or if they were sick, and you're guessing a lot. You're not guessing as much in this phase because they are telling you a lot, but just a lot of trust and belief that God created them and He loved them more than I did, and that not only that, He picked me to be their mom. He could have given my kids to anyone. He gave them to me. I'm so thankful. But the times that I feel inadequate, I'm like, no, God picked me. He picked me to be, for whatever reason, so that they can have something they need to go work through later that allows them to know God better. But just believing that He chose me, and I wasn't always good, and this is what I would say, I was good at this sometimes, but let your friends in on the ugly and on the messy, and sometimes I was really good at that, and sometimes I really just wanted to have it all together because I was falling apart inside, and those moments ended up catapulting, because then I was falling apart inside and feeling bad about myself, and then I would take it out on my kids. So just believing God created you, believing God created your kids and made them exactly who they are, and that He chose you to be their parent, and that He will equip you in every way, and that there is such purpose in every hard thing. There's not a convenient stage of parenting. There's just not. There wasn't when they were an infant, and there's not at 13, 15, 17, 19. It's still not easy. But God picked you, and so just really leaning into Him.
Yeah.
And this was where, for whatever reason, for me, even with my older 2, it became that.
Yeah. Yeah, remembering that we're never enough, whatever the stage,
Right.
whatever the circumstance, but God in us is exactly what our kids need.
Yes.
And so I love that. And that's so encouraging. Doesn't that just take a weight off, kind of, to know that we don't have to be enough?
There's one more thing I do want you to know. This is that point in life. Like, when they're toddlers and infants, you can talk about different ways you sleep and, like, breast or bottle, and those are all personal things. Something about the 3 to 5 too, your family is going to start doing things differently than other families. You might do Mother's Day out, you might not. You might do little sports teams, you might not. It's okay. Whatever your answer is that you've worked through with your husband for it to be what your family does, it's okay. And it's okay if it looks different for each kid. You might have a kid who needs to go to Mother's Day out and one that needs to be home with you. Being real intentional in that and knowing it's okay if your family doesn't do it like everyone else, and it's okay if you don't do it the same way for every kid.
Yeah.
That would be the last thing I would say.
Maybe we can leave fair maybe for next week. We used to talk a lot about, it's not fair, and because every kid is different.
Yeah.
And fair is not, there's all the quotes, fair is not equal. The fair is something that comes in October. All the things,
I like that one. But not at our house. You had to get an invitation. We never got ours.
Oh.
It was genius. That was another.
An invitation to the fair?
We didn't get ours, so we didn't get to go.
Wow. If you need an idea, there you go. There's one. We'll talk about, like, Santa and the Easter Bunny another time with you. But, I think that's a huge thing to remember. Our kids are all different. They need different things from us. Mm-hmm. And we really begin to see that in the preschool years if we haven't yet. And then God's enough in us for all of those different little people in our house. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
This has been fun. And give her a hand. Let me close us in prayer this morning, and then we'll be dismissed. God, I just thank you for today and just for the reminder that you are enough, that you are sovereign, that you provide everything we need. Whether we show up empty, we wake up not having anything to give for the day, or whether wherever we are, whatever circumstance we're in, God, I just praise you that you provide for us, that you are over all things, that you live in and through us, and that your power in us gives us what we need for that day. And so I just pray that we would realize and recognize that in our parenting, God. Some of us are in really hard circumstances right now, in difficult situations with our kids maybe, and so I just ask a special blessing on those people today, a special word of encouragement from you, maybe from a friend, just a special extra blessing from you. God, just an encouragement and just some perseverance and diligence that you can provide to us, God. I just pray that you would go before us. I pray for those who are in an easy stage right now. Would you just help them to be grateful, to recognize the ways that you've blessed them? And God, would you just prepare us for the next step of the journey with our kids, God? I pray for those who feel today like they've made mistakes or things that they regret, things that they wish that they had done differently. I pray that you would use those to propel us towards you, but not to be overcome with guilt and with shame, God. Would you just take those things? Would you just help us know that you are a great shepherd, that you love us, and that you care for us? We love you and praise you in Jesus' name.